I'm going to be handing over to Mandy Fowler, who's going to speak to us on strengthening arts, cultural and heritage fundraising. Mandy is an independent consultant, curator and producer working in contemporary visual arts across individual organisations, consortia and artists. Mandy also mentors creative professionals at all stages of their careers and has a particular interest in developing the practices of and opportunities for artists who have marginalised lived experiences in the sector. So just say before I hand over to Mandy that again, any questions, I'll be walking around the room with the microphone. Any questions online, please do use the chat function to communicate with us. And again, if we drop out at any point, we have got intermittent Wi-Fi, so please just hang on in there and we will be back. So without further ado, Mandy Fowler, thank you.
Hello everyone, it's great to see you all here, those of you who are in the room and those that I can't actually see online, but hello and welcome to you too. Just before I start, I have got a presentation that's very slide heavy and it's actually quite text heavy as well. So for those people who don't work in a text heavy way, I'm talking you through it as well. So don't worry too much about trying to read all the text on the slides as well. But I particularly wanted to make sure that this goes to you as a handout as well, so that you've got the information on the slides as well. So it's sort of serving a purpose beyond just in terms of what I'm talking about. So don't worry too much about kind of taking notes as well as we're kind of going along, because you'll get what the slides are saying in a handout format afterwards. So I was asked to talk about strengthening arts, cultural or heritage fundraising. And I've actually added in a word here, as you can see on this slide, in brackets, because I think words are really important when we're talking about what we do and the funding situation around it especially. I've used this word investment, and I'll talk about that more as we go through the presentation in terms of why in particular I've used that word. Okay, so I do a lot of place-based work, and that's across places, small places, small towns, cities, whole regions, in terms of how we define place. And one of the first things that just before I get into that, one of the things I wanted to say to you is it's important to share our experiences in the room, okay, to support each other, as you were doing in the conversations just now that we were having, your experiences, so that we can learn from each other, okay. It's not one way either. There is going to be a lot of me talking to you, first of all, but also, we'll hopefully get some time in for some questions as well at the end. And again, using the knowledge of the people in the room as well. So just quickly, we're going to cover thinking about the value of what it is that we're delivering, with a focus on place-based funding. So I'm going to quickly look at some of that in terms of where is that place-based funding currently. And I've also got some top tips for writing applications as well, which is not just in relation to kind of place-based aspects, but also for all of you that are in that sort of scenario of writing funding applications. So we might not get time to go through all of those in detail, but you'll have it as a handout to take away with you as well. So hopefully that's really useful. So one of the first things that I tend to do when I'm working in a place-related way is to try and understand, especially when it comes to kind of funding, what's going on there currently. And that isn't just in terms of NPOs, because that's a very particular model and sometimes in very particular locations as well. So what I've and also there's just been a round of NPO funding. So I'm sure, most people who are in the sector have seen some headlines around who's being funded and where and who's got how much money. So one of the things I wanted to look at beyond that is, what about the rest of the money in terms of, Arts Council money especially? Where's that going in terms of project grants? And also the DYCP means developing your creative practice for people who haven't come across that yet. So that's for Individual Practitioners Development Fund. So what I wanted to have a quick look at in terms of, getting myself familiar with how well the East Midlands is doing in terms of the funding it's already getting, I had a quick look at the Arts Council data. Now, this is available to everyone. It's on their website. You can actually see the level of who's getting kind of the funding as well, the names of the people that have been getting the funding, or the organisations. So these figures that I've pulled together here are, I've got a column looking at the funding on a national level in terms of England, and we're talking about visual arts funding here. The Midlands funding, what's coming into the Midlands, and then East Midlands, because I wanted to establish kind of where are you as a region currently in terms of funding. And the percentages I've got there is in relation to the Midlands. So actually you're doing well. You're getting a reasonable amount of funding into the East Midlands in terms of, the money that's coming into the Midlands. So you're not starting from a very low level. You're starting from quite a good level in terms of what's already coming in. So we're looking at kind of how can we look and build upon that in terms of, more funding, strengthening that kind of element of funding that we're getting. Okay. So one of the first things when it comes to funding that we want to consider here and look at is the relationship. Okay, you've got funders who have got money, they've got funding, they can't spend it themselves. That's why they're there as a funder. What they want to be able to do is invest in other people to be able to deliver on behalf of them and spend the money for them, basically. So it's all about the relationship, okay? It's all about the exchange in terms of that. And what is the return for those people who are providing the funding or the income or the investment, because they're investing in you and what you're wanting to do, okay? So you've got to really understand, so that return, what are they getting out of it, okay, in terms of, why are they going to invest in you? Why are they going to give you funding to realise your work or your project? To do that, you really need to, I've got read and listen here. So, it comes in two ways. It comes in terms of, it might be written criteria, but it might be that you're having a conversation with them, but you really need to kind of listen and you really need to kind of read. One of the really common mistakes I see in terms of people approaching funding is they've got a great idea, a great project, and they really want to get that down on paper. They don't pay attention to what it is that the funder, the investor, is really wanting to get out of it, their money that they've got in terms of how they want to spend it. So people tend to, write about their idea because they're so excited about it, especially, and want to get it down on paper, and they don't really kind of think about what the questions are asking of them or what it is that funder wants to kind of be able to achieve with their funding longer term. Okay. People invest money in people. Okay, so while we're talking about a kind of place context here, we're talking about people actually in terms of how that works. So yeah, that element around how you can help the funder to be able to get the most out of their investment in your organisation, your work, your practice. Rarely, in terms of funding, is it easy money. Okay, it's not easy money. It doesn't just appear. Rarely is it no strings attached that you can do what you want with it, once you've kind of committed to what your project looks like or what it is that you're delivering, okay? And rarely is it a one-hit wonder, okay? That's about that kind of relationship. So you've got to think about that in terms of, once a funder, investor has invested in you, they will be more likely to kind of consider you again in a later sort of stage, so to continue that relationship with you. Okay, so this thinking about language is really important. Okay, we need to consider the language that we use. So that's why I've used that word investment. Okay, you're asking for an investment in what it is that you're trying to do. A lot of organisations and people that work in the arts sector, because we're largely a charitable sector, have a very charitable kind of consideration in terms of a begging bowl approach when it comes to money. Please give me a bit of money to be able to do what I want. So this kind of aspect here, I'm using that kind of image from the film Oliver, in terms of that, please, can I have some more? Please, can you give me some money? You've got to be really confident in terms of what you're doing and what you're asking for, and understanding the value as well of what it is that you're delivering. And I'll pick up on this word value in terms of what we mean. Okay. So the value of what we're delivering in the cultural sector for funders or for investors largely breaks down into 4 areas, okay? And most funders fit into one of these areas or a selection of these areas, okay? So there's a cultural value in terms of what we're delivering, okay? What culture is doing within itself, okay? Entertaining us, moving us, inspiring us, crucial to our identities as individuals and communities, and a talent development element there. Okay. There's also a social value to what we're delivering as well as a sector, and that's about how we bring people together, we make valuable contributions to health and well-being, inclusion and belonging, developing empathy, breaking down barriers, and developing creative thinking. Okay, so you might be able to start thinking about some funders you know and how this sits with them. There's an educational value aspect to what we do at all stages of our education system. It's crucial to imagination, self-expression, creativity, and developing skills. Okay, and then this value here, economic value, tends to sort of sit with the place-based a little bit, and by that we mean the kind of culture develops the talent for the nation's creative industries. You might hear the word kind of creative economy being used quite a lot. That's in terms of what it means. Creative industries is vast. It's not just about the arts organisations or artists, but also beyond that, and stretches into the kind of gaming industry as well, where there's that kind of creative element to what you do. And in terms of that place-based aspect, we're looking at how culture kind of revives our cities, drives urban regeneration, changes local and national perspectives, and creates better places to live and to locate businesses. There is also that kind of tourism element as well, that it does actually, in areas where tourism is particularly an important industry and aspect of the economy as well, it does bring significant vital visitor revenue, okay, on a national level and also a local level. Okay, that may be part of what you do or may not, but it's also about that kind of the place in which how that place is then kind of perceived as somewhere that people want to go and visit. So I wanted to quickly look at the national lottery funders that's kind of available for people. So that's in terms of Arts Council, Heritage Lottery, and communities as well, the lottery communities programme too. And I want to just quickly look at what do they mean in terms of kind of place-based aspect to that, okay? So with Arts Council's current Let's Create strategy, the place-based aspect tends to sit largely, although not exclusively, in their cultural communities outcome. Okay, are you all familiar with Arts Council's new Let's Create strategy? All had a look at it? Yeah, and the 3 outcomes that they've got there. So it largely sits in terms of the cultural communities. And so what they mean in terms of that, they've got this aspect around, that villages, towns and cities, that through a collaborative approach, that's really important here, okay? We're talking about collaboration, how places are collaborative, that can have a deep and lasting effect on places and the people who live in them, okay? This is what they're wanting under this outcome. That investment helps improve lives, regenerate neighbourhoods, support local economies, attract visitors and bring people together. Okay. And under that, there's the kind of aspect of it can only work if there is a shared commitment to removing the geographical, economic and social barriers that currently prevent many people from taking part in cultural activity, that is, okay. So in terms of thinking about place-based, and you might do this as an individual practitioner who's applying for funding, or it might be as an organisation that's applying for funding, or a group of organisations and or kind of practitioners mixed in with organisations if you're applying around kind of place-based funding. So that's kind of what the outcome's looking at. There's some key elements that they've got there as well in terms of what they're anticipating might be funded under the outcome. So how that outcome is what Arts Council want to happen with their funding, how your projects are going to help them to be able to deliver that kind of outcome. Okay. So improving access to a full range of cultural opportunities where people live. That is exactly what it says, you know, where people actually live. So you haven't got to travel to other places to be able to get access to kind of cultural activity. Okay. That you're working with communities to better understand and respond to their needs and interests. Okay, which results in increased cultural engagement and the wide range of social benefits that brings. Okay, and then there's an aspect around working collaboratively through place-based partnerships there. So picking up on the conversation earlier about partnerships and how important those are, especially kind of in terms of location and place-based activity. And that's wanting to be able to support the involvement of communities in high quality culture, to improve creative and cultural education for people, to improve health and well-being through creative and cultural activity, and to build skills as well and capacity in the cultural sector and its growing economic impact. Okay. Also, an aspect around connecting people and places, including diaspora communities, nationally and internationally. Okay, so all of this is kind of sitting under that outcome. So you need to really think about, you know, kind of what your work is doing to deliver against some of these things if you're thinking about approaching, you know, your a funder in terms of place-based activity. Also, if you're applying as an individual practitioner, you need to kind of think through some of these things as well if you're considering that place-based. So in terms of priority places and the levelling up for culture places, where Arts Council really want to put more investment, you need to think about how, if I'm applying from a particular place and I want to be able to be considered in terms of that priority place, like levelling up for culture place, then what is my project doing in terms of place, in terms of location, okay, and the fact that I'm undertaking activity in that place. Okay, so National Lottery Heritage as well has got a place-based aspect to that projects are connecting people and communities. Okay. And they've got a list of priorities there that aren't that dissimilar to some of Arts Council's priorities in terms of that funding. So promoting inclusion and involving a wider range of people is a mandatory aspect in terms of that. Boosting the local economy, encouraging creative development and job creation, supporting well-being, create better places to live, work and visit, and to improve the resilience of organisations working in heritage. So you can see some similarities here in terms of where place-based funding policy is currently. Okay. Communities, so the National Lottery Communities Fund, which I've seen quite a lot of organisations get funding under this, and artists taking part in projects actually that sits under National Lottery Communities. So it's an aspect here around communities and place that you need to be aware of. Okay, so they like projects that are ran by communities who have the living experience of the community situation. Okay, they want to be able to help communities to thrive, to make positive changes in the community. And they've got some priorities there again about bringing people together, building stronger relationships across communities, improving the places and spaces that matter to communities, and to help more people to reach their potential by supporting them at the earliest possible stage. Okay, so they quite like some very early activity in terms of working with communities. Now, National Lottery Communities, don't know if anyone's had any experience of funding from them at all in the room previously. Brilliant. Okay. So they work on a basis where they have relationship managers, I can't remember what their job title is currently, who are on the ground. They understand their communities that they're working. So you have to look at kind of, you know, what is it in my community that the need, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. But they understand those communities as well. So having conversations with them in advance of applying for funding is really important so that they can see that there's kind of, you know, what your project is doing, and they may even be able to point you in direction of who to consider working with as well. Okay, so some of the key themes that you can see coming across all three of these funders here in terms of where they want to put their investment in place-based. There's an aspect around responding to local need. Okay, so they really want to be able to see a demonstration of what is going on in those communities. What is the need for the work that you're looking at delivering in your community? They want to see that element around engaging communities, especially communities who are underserved in terms of the cultural sector work. So who's not engaging with cultural activity in the area currently? And you want engaging those communities in the planning, in the delivery itself, and responding to cultural activity. So I was really interested in Sard talking about some of the work they're doing at New Art Exchange earlier as well, in terms of that citizen involvement in making decisions about what's going on in their area. Okay, so that place aspect, uniqueness of place is celebrated. Okay, so not and somebody earlier I heard mentioning kind of like, not every high street looks exactly the same. You kind of hear that a lot, but also kind of not every place is the same. So what works in one place is not going to be the same in another. The needs of that place is not going to be the same. The people who are based there are not the same in terms of every community. Okay, so that uniqueness of place is really important. They want to be able to make places better places to live in and to work in as well. Okay, so communities and places are enhanced and more economically prosperous and have strong leadership, partnerships and capabilities. Okay, there's a well-being aspect coming across all of these funders in terms of how people's well-being is increased as well through cultural activity. Okay, that you need to be really aware of here, and also their environment. Okay, and also something else that's coming through in terms of all of these funders is that diversity of the artists or practitioners in terms of who's given the opportunity, whose talent is being developed here, and especially those who are currently underrepresented in the sector. So again, back to some of what New Art Exchange and Sard was talking about earlier. Okay, there's also an important aspect around evidencing the outcomes and impact of your work. So you need to tell funders in advance what that might look like and how you're going to know that your project has made a difference or your organisation has made a difference. So you need to really think through, how is it that I'm going to make sure we've kind of evidenced those outcomes and impacts of my work. So evaluation, as came through in the conversation earlier, is really important. Okay. So in terms of place-based applications, some things that you need to think about. Okay. And that's beyond just what your project is doing and kind of where it's doing, but to really understand what's going on in that area. Okay, there's a number of ways in which there's information out there about what's going on in your area, and also the strategic aspects of your local area. So what is going on in terms of that kind of levelling up agenda? Where is that filtering down into kind of places? But also how local authorities especially are having to respond with their kind of local plans. So a lot of cultural organisations and people working in the cultural sector think it's something completely separate to them and they don't need to be aware of that. But in terms of thinking about what's going on in place, and any work you're doing in a particular place needs to really come from being informed by what's going on and what the strategy is for those places locally. Okay, so how does it fit with that? The local authority's development plan, and each local authority has a development plan which looks at what's important in that area, and that's across a number of things, and that takes into account the communities of people who are in those places as well, in terms of what that might look like. Okay, so you really need to think about that and be informed by that. And also a cultural strategy if your place actually has one. So what is it that's kind of really important in that place that's come through, which is evidence-based in terms of what cultural activity looks like in that place, where the priorities are going forward. also think about how your project is dynamic. So we talked about that kind of partnership element earlier. So how are you making the best of the resources that you're kind of working with, and also who are you working with, you know, in terms of that partnership? And I think it's a really important aspect in terms of who's working with the communities already in my area or in that place that you're applying for funding for, and also thinking outside of the cultural sector. So there's a lot of kind of cultural sector talking to cultural sector going on. You need to think kind of beyond that in terms of who else could I be, you know, having a partnership with and having a conversation with about how I might work with them across a range of other organisations that work with people. So what might that look like? Who do I want to be working with? Who are the communities of people I want to understand more about, work with, deliver projects for, have them involved in my project? So there's a real kind of, you know, need to think beyond the cultural sector there. Okay. And in terms of applying for the funding or the investment, you really need to reference how, you know, what that need is and how your project is delivering against that sort of local need. Okay. So you need to think about and articulate the value that your project is delivering. Okay, so when we talked back just now about those kind of particularly 4 areas of values, what is my project doing in terms of, you know, how it's delivering on those values? You know, what is it exactly that my project is doing? How do I talk about it in terms of the value that it's delivering for this area? Okay, and you need to really think about that and articulate it in your project. Okay, that you're not just talking about your project by way of this is what's going to happen as a result of that project for me. This is what it means for my organisation or my project, but also in terms of, you know, how is that then going to have an impact in that wider strategic way? Okay, so really thinking about that strategically. So if your local plan, your local cultural strategy is saying that people's well-being will be improved, is one of their aims that they're trying to have happen with any investment that they've got, then really think about that in terms of your project. I mean, everyone says kind of culture improves well-being, but what does that actually mean in terms of what it is that you're delivering? How are you going to evidence that there has been, that it's made a difference to people's lives, that, you know, people really have had an aspect of their well-being changed as a result of my project taking place or my organisation kind of being here? There have been a number of place-based funding streams recently. There's been the Cultural Development Fund, there's the Place Partnership projects that's currently open as well. And within the criteria for those places, for those funding strands rather, there is a specific aspect in terms of what they're wanting to achieve with that. So what I wanted to look at quickly here was the recent Cultural Development Fund that's been out there. They had some specific aspects that they wanted projects to deliver on. Okay, they wanted to unlock local economic growth and productivity within that. So as creative businesses, what does that mean? You know, what does that mean in terms of what's been able to grow and change as a result of that? They also wanted to look at a kind of an aspect around how places have become more attractive, you know, more attractive places to live, work, visit and invest. And also to strengthen local leadership partners and capability. Okay, so that was some specific aspects on all of the above, basically, that they were wanting to achieve with that funding. And those people who have, or those areas that have received that funding, are having to deliver against that and also provide evidence in terms of, you know, what their project is doing. I said how are we doing on time? Halfway through. Great, so we are going to have some time for questions. I've put together some top tips in terms of when you're applying for funding. Okay, so it's a sort of checklist. Now this, I've tried to be really broad in terms of this. So this is across a whole range of those funders that I've looked at, potentially across, also try to capture that might be, you know, if you're applying for funding or investment at an individual level through to kind of an organisation, through to kind of a consortium. Okay, so I'm sure you've seen various top tips around, what to make sure. So I've got 15. It's quite a lot. I want to run through them quickly because I want you to see kind of how what we've been talking about breaks down in terms of that. Okay. So what is the need for the project? Okay, is really clear. Sometimes within funding applications, they have set questions for you to answer, or sometimes they're kind of set sections that they want you to kind of answer. But this checklist is kind of to make sure you've covered all of these things somewhere in your application. So before you're putting in a funding application to a funder, use it as a kind of checklist and think, have I covered this point somewhere? Because this is the stuff that funders want to know, whether they've asked it specifically as a question or not. Use this as a checklist to kind of go through and make sure you've kind of ticked those aspects. Okay. So the need for the project. Have audiences or beneficiaries been involved in the development of the project? Okay, so that's demonstrating that you've got that real understanding of the need for the project. Who are you and why are you the best person to be delivering this project, or best consortium or group of organisations or organisation, however that's working? Okay, what is the project? Okay, so quite often, and I think especially within Arts Council's latest project grant application form, there isn't much space to talk about kind of what is the project, to be able to explain it in your terms. And so that makes it kind of more tricky to be able to sell that vision of what it is that you're trying to do. But you need to excite the funders in terms of, for them to invest in you. My project is going to be, looks like this, and this is what it's going to be delivering. Okay, so you've got to make sure that you're selling the vision of that project. Okay. A clear case of how your project or your idea fits with the objectives or the criteria of the funders. Okay, you'll find that funders, and this again goes to if you're having a conversation with a funder or a potential kind of investor, will use keywords. So they tend to use words that is important to them in terms of what it is that they're trying to achieve with their investment. So have a look, really read the question or the criteria, or think about when you're having a conversation with someone, what are those words that they keep using that means it's really important to them in terms of what it is that they're trying to invest in. And then use those words to talk about how your project is doing that. Okay, it's really important that you're sort of reflecting to them that you are delivering, kind of they're the ones that, I say, it's all about that relationship, that exchange, that you're helping them to be able to deliver what it is that they're wanting to invest in. Okay, what you want to achieve and why. Okay, within your project, so set some well-argued and measurable outcomes. Okay, the change that will take place as a result of your project taking place. So who or what will benefit from the project, and who is your target audience or beneficiaries that you're working with in the project? Okay, think about it in terms of that. How will you be able to kind of prove to the funder that all of those things have been achieved? And also, not just that, but you have delivered what you wanted to deliver. And what are you learning from that as well as part of that process? Okay. And again, that element in terms of, what difference the project will make, what are the outcomes, what is it you're aiming to achieve through your project? What does that look like, the difference that's going to be made as a result of the project? Why do you need the investment or the funding to be able to achieve what you've set out to do? Okay. Quite often there's an element of a funder wanting to see some kind of delivery plan. Okay, so make sure when you're putting that together that it is well thought through. It's not just a tick box exercise to put some dates down on paper, but actually that you're demonstrating within that you've got good quality delivery that will actually deliver that project. So that's part of the checks and balances of the kind of project from an investor's perspective, is that they can see that your project will actually achieve what it is that you're set out to achieve. They can see you've thought it through about how you're going to get from the start of the project to the end of the project, and it's well thought through. Okay. Within that, it's well budgeted, well resourced, well timed. You've got the right people involved. That it will be managed well. Okay. How will you tell people about the project? Okay, the element around the communication and the marketing. And again, think about those partners that you're working with here as well. So if you're wanting to be able to your project is for particular people that you're kind of wanting to work with, and kind of being able to reach particular people, that they're involved in your process. How are you going to actually communicate to them to make sure that happens? Okay, so you've got to make sure you've covered that. The budget, how much do you need, how you've arrived at those figures, how much other funding you have raised, match funding if that's necessary as well. Just be clear about that, okay? We touched upon evaluation just now, but it's really important that you've got some kind of way of, in your project, of being able to show how that is actually taking place. Okay, what is it you're going to be doing to be able to demonstrate those outcomes or changes that you say is going to happen as a result of your project has actually happened? What's the legacy? Colette was talking earlier about a project in particular in terms of the legacy. What might happen once this project has taken place and is no longer taking place as a result of this having taken place? Okay, what might be the next steps beyond this project? And, you know, what's the plans for kind of continuing that, if it's going to continue, or in what form that might look like, or if you've developed a relationship through the project, how might that kind of continue beyond the end of the life of the project? Okay, that exit strategy. So it's kind of the project is coming to an end, but what happens kind of next there? Okay. What will happen if you don't get the investment? Now, this is something that sometimes is asked as a specific question. And I think, you know, in terms of what the funder is looking for within that, is not a response to say, well, the project doesn't happen. It's as simple as that. If you don't give me the money, it doesn't happen. What this question is asking is, how committed are you to making sure that this actually happens? So your response needs to be thinking about, what might plan B be? If I don't get this funding, then what is kind of plan B? How am I committed? How am I demonstrating that I'm committed to what I want to achieve here? How am I going to make that happen in a different way? So you need to be thinking about, well, I'll be seeking other investment from kind of elsewhere, or I might be able to kind of scale it down somehow, or approach it in a different way completely. Not that you don't give me the money, it doesn't happen. It's the end of it. Okay. And then a really important aspect that I think has the last couple of years has demonstrated to us in terms of, you know, how important contingency thinking and planning and budgeting is. So any unforeseen things like a global pandemic that may happen, what might be a kind of alternative way of being able to do this? So this is about that kind of risk element of your project. So you've really thought through, how's this going to happen? It might be that I have to adjust a time frame, and you've made kind of considerations for that, or delivery might have to happen online. Okay, that kind of flexibility of your project, but it's actually there in your thinking that you've considered that as being potential, and especially now for your project. Okay, so that's a kind of 15-point sort of checklist, really. To be able to kind of help you guide you through a kind of funding process that you may go through with any of those funders and funders beyond the funders we've talked about. That's all I've got by way of a sort of slide presentation for you. I hope you're all still awake there. So you will get a copy of this. That Colette will circulate to everyone. So you've got that kind of checklist, and you've got those kind of points to be able to refer back to at a later date. Now, I think we've got a little bit of time for some questions.
Yes, we've got about 20 minutes. So yeah, plenty of time for questions and conversation. Thank you so much for that, Mandy.
Great.
I'm sure lots going around in people's minds. Has anyone got anything they want to kick off with? While we're thinking, Tom, go for it. Yeah.
I was just some thoughts really. Like I was thinking, you know, like sometimes when I've sat with these forms, like the funding forms, like sometimes my experience of being a creative person is about possibility and kind of failure. You know, things like not necessarily going the way you want them to go, and then having to react to that. And I just was thinking out loud really, and just sort of. Like, it's like a tension, like the form is going one way and your creative kind of energy is going in a different direction.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I hear
Do you know?
that
Yeah.
question really often. I think it's a really good point. And people say that kind of, quite often that's not, I can't apply for funding because my project may look like, I'm not quite sure yet, it's too risky, kind of, I don't know what I'm going to make at the end of it. There's a difference between the kind of the output and the outcome. So the difference here is around what is it you're trying to achieve with your project, and rather than kind of what is it I'm actually trying to make as part of that project. So that flexibility I'm talking about in terms of the kind of contingency aspect sort of allows for some changes to make play. You can articulate that through the kind of narrative in terms of, this is going to be a process that I'm going to learn through as I'm going along, which it might have 3 steps to it, say, for instance, and each step is informed by the previous step. It's about the kind of what it is you're wanting to achieve overall, rather than the kind of actual way in which it's sort of broken down, or what you might, make at the end of it. And also kind of how you're going to learn through the process as well. So failure is a really important thing. To be able to learn that something doesn't work is really important, but you've got to go through it to know that it doesn't work in the first place. So those kind of outcomes that you're trying to achieve may not look exactly as it was the way in which you set it out at the beginning of the project. So what's happened instead? What have you learned along the way? So don't shy away from that kind of risk, or kind of be kind of it's got to look exactly like this and I've got to exactly deliver that. There's a flexibility that you need to be able to kind of build in terms of, I'm going to learn through this process. Each step is going to inform the next step, and it may not be exactly this, but I'm going to still aim for that somehow. And if a global pandemic comes along and I can't deliver it like that, I've thought through another way in which I might be able to, deliver something else. Does that make sense? Does that kind of answer the question? It is, because whilst in one way they're kind of asking you for specifics and some detail, at the same time you don't know until you've done the project what that might look like. So it is about that kind of risk and how you're managing that risk really through the process.
Different funders have different requirements, so some might be a bit more rigid than others. So
yeah,
yes, we'll start with Lucy. Do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to respond to that question as well. Yeah, just following on from what you just said, actually, Colette, that some funders will be more flexible than other funders, but the main thing is that at the point of application, you've defined what Mandy has so brilliantly explained, and you've got your project plan, and your funder is confident that you can deliver it once. And if you're lucky enough to be successful, most funders will then accept a level of change once your project is actually happening. So I think you can tie yourself up in knots sometimes thinking about what might or might not go wrong, and you need to consider some of those things, but no creative project can consider all of those things. And if you've got a plan and you've got an objective, and you're lucky enough to get the money, nearly every funder I've ever worked with has never had a problem when things have gone wrong, as long as you've got an alternative plan that is somewhere similar to what you were hoping to do to meet your objective. So I think, don't overthink it either, and just get to the point where you've articulated what you want to do, and you're clear about it. But if things change in the future, you can kind of adjust as you go along. And as you say, Mandy, building in contingency is a really good way of doing that, because I think every project, particularly in the arts, has something that kind of needs to adjust, be it not meeting quite your audience targets, or marketing costs going up, or it can be anything that can change. But I think you can sometimes overthink that too much, and just get to the point where you've got a rounded idea is a good one. No, I didn't have a question.
Yeah, there you go. The experience in the room and sharing that knowledge, that's great. Thank you. And yeah, I undertake a lot of evaluation as well, and Within that, that's part of what you're looking at all the time. You know, what's changed through the project. I don't think I've ever been involved in a project, and I've got, you know, almost 20 years experience where something has been delivered exactly as it was set out to be delivered. There's always been some changes and learning, but you've got to capture all of that and think that through as well, and why, if something doesn't go quite to plan, why you've had to change it and how you've thought that through and what it was responding to. So it's that kind of learning that, you know, is taking place. So it's not failure, it's learning.
Thank you. Oh, we'll just go here and then come over to you. Go, Tamsin.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Tamsin Greaves, and I work here at Mansfield Museum, and I'm running a project called Art Power, which delivers creative workshops in the museum, connecting with museum objects for domestic abuse survivors and other vulnerable women. And we have funding for 2 years from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation.
Brilliant.
But I just wondered what your experience is, and people in the room of, I'm sort of nearly halfway through the project, and I'm already worried about the sort of cliff edge of something that is working well, and I've got you know, women coming regularly and getting something out of it. I mean, we are doing evaluation with the Warwick Edinburgh mental wellbeing scale and so on, but what are our chances of being able to continue beyond the 2 years? Because I feel already worried that these women are going to be sort of dropped off a cliff edge when they've got something which is really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to let other people answer that for you before I give a response. But I just, to connect this to some of the conversations we were having this morning, and also to a point I made earlier in the presentation, I'm really interested, who are your partners in that project?
Well, in terms of the services who refer women to us, so there's a few, but we work with social prescribers, we work with NIDAS, we work with the Nottingham Sexual Abuse Service, Women's Aid, I have a contact with the DWP, so they refer women to us. There's also an organisation called She in Mansfield, and also the Jigsaw Support Service, also in Mansfield. But as time's going on, I'm also finding that I'm having referrals from women that are accessing the group, which I was, to start with, was slightly worried about how I managed that. But of course, they're referring, they get it, and they're referring other women that have similar needs. So that's working well. So a range of services.
Yeah, so none of those partners that you just talked about are other cultural sector organisations. So that's brilliant in terms of, you know, that kind of the dynamism of who you're working with, the model you're working with, how you're connecting with people, you know, the kind of communities that you're working with. That's great. Anybody want to give a response, got an experience of coming up to the end of a project, how to continue?
Hi, just on that, it's amplified. We work in Mansfield, and this isn't pointing the finger at anyone because we're all really busy, and we're equally don't tell everyone what we're doing. But obviously understanding and knowing that's happening, we didn't know that, and that's no one's fault. But then I guess that's where the partnerships come into place, is where when a project is about Out to End, we're a Creative People and Places programme, and we have opportunities and spaces. It's about how, I think you've got to be very careful that once you get a group as well. So when I worked in Stoke, we worked with a group of refugees, and everyone came to us because we were the ones who worked with the refugees, and it wasn't authentic. It was very like, there was a bit of an issue with that because everyone just kind of were wanting to kind of tick boxes. So I think you've got to be very cautious of that. But at the same time, there are partners who authentically want to work with people and create those relationships. So, and some people really want to hold on to those relationships, and I get that. So it's about how you let go and who are the right people to let go to, and when do you invite the people in to have that conversation, so it doesn't feel like we're all trying to kind of manipulate and take advantage of the fact that there's a group here that we all need to engage with. So I think it is an understanding about what we're doing, who we're working with, what are those crossovers. But it's easier said than done, isn't it? I mean, we say a lot, but the capacity of being able to sit down in a room and share what we're doing. I mean, likewise, Mansfield Museum don't know what we're doing. We haven't shared anything about our programme. So it's as I said, it's not pointing fingers, but I do think there's that if you're worried the project's going to drop off the cliff edge, is there an opportunity to work in partnership with someone else and apply for funding and continue something further, take the learning from that, and then if it's a pilot, and develop it even further or to other areas as well. So yeah, it's just again a long-winded point.
Great, I think that's really important. Thanks for sharing that, Carl. And I think also that element of what I see a lot of in terms of audience development projects is that you start working with a particular audience grouping and the projects come to an end. That's it, relationship comes to an end. But you've got to think beyond the life of the project, think about how am I relevant to the people I'm working with on an ongoing basis, how's my organisation in your case kind of continuing to have it. It might not be that they really work with those people as a group in the way in which you are, but kind of in other aspects of your work beyond how you're working with those people currently.
Thank you. Just to quickly say before I hand over to Charlotte, I mean, obviously you've got, I guess, an example now that it works, I guess. So you've done a lot of the legwork in, applying for funding elsewhere or reapplying. You can say, we know that this project works because we've done it. And obviously, I guess it's not about doing the same projects again and again. It's what works, what doesn't, how can you change it to make it more effective and for it to be successful in applying for funding again, be that, incorporating more partners, expanding the area you're working with. It could be anything, I guess, but I think part of that as well is capacity. Like I know that in my role, both with CVAN and primary, that it's my job to apply for funding to be able to do the work that I do. So in primary, I have to apply for funding to deliver artist development activity. I'm the artist development coordinator, so I don't know if it's you who would be applying for funding, but quite often I guess it's your time and capacity, knowing that it's taken up a lot of your time and capacity to deliver something, and then to start thinking about then having to apply to do it again, which is also very time consuming. It's a lot. It's a lot. I'm not sure where the happy point is, but
absolutely. And the fact that when I talk about the relationship in relation to a funder or an investor, it's also the relationship between the people you're working with as well, in terms of what might be next for them. Have a conversation with in terms of what might be, how is my organisation still relevant to them beyond the project? What might they want to do next? I've seen several projects where there's been the legacy of that project has been that some people, particularly thinking about a co-producing kind of relationship that's happened, where a couple of people that were involved in that project had an idea for how they might want to continue that relationship with the organisation and propose something completely different, and together they applied for funding to undertake more activity that looked completely different but was still a kind of ongoing relationship.
Yeah, I mean we've done a conservation workshop where where the women were. We had someone from the National Trust who was showing us how to clean some of the museum objects, metal, ceramic, and so on. And some of the women may take on a section of the collection, with a view to research and display and so on. So there are sort of avenues for extending the life of the project. But I suppose it's when you see that there's so much need, and there is benefit ensuing. So there may be people who sort of move on beyond it and do other things. And a couple of them have applied for gallery assistant jobs, for example. Some of them have delivered workshops themselves
Brilliant.
To their peer groups. So we are thinking of ways to extend it. But nevertheless, there's also still the ongoing need for the core service. Yeah. So I just wonder whether Esme Fairbairn would give us more. What experience?
Have you had that conversation?
No, not yet.
check in.
They do repeat funds, I think, do they?
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes they want a not just repeat of what you've done, though. It's like, what's your learning been? Where are you going? Exactly. What's next? What is that next step? Like I was talking about that kind of the legacy. What is that next step? What's kind of coming beyond this?
It could be an independent support group that women decide to form themselves. And then they can apply for their own funding.
Hello, hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm an artist and I work at Nottingham Contemporary, and I was actually going to share a project called Loudspeaker, which supports women with complex needs, which has finished its funding, and that was for 10 years and finished in December. And kind of what you were saying, that feeling of it possibly being like a cliff edge, and the programme runs 3 times a year, and it's a 10-week programme, and but actually what a lot of just been shared now is what has been put in place to support a lot of the women on that programme. So we have a lot of the people who've been on the programme are now gallery assistants and have set up their own network groups, and we have there was a peer mentor scheme as part of Loudspeaker, so women from the previous course would support other women on future courses, so yeah, I can share some of those ideas afterwards as well, but they've already been shared anyway as well, about finding other ways with the partners that we've been working with, which are very similar in terms of that kind of referral program, those referrals, in how to get more funding to deliver something that is different but is a legacy of the original program as well. I also had another question as well, which was more practical, about where to find funding. Obviously, with National Lottery and Arts Council, they're oversubscribed, and the competition is really intense, especially at the moment. And I know that there are lots of smaller trusts and grants where you can get funding, and I've found a few. I mean, like I said, working at the Contemporary, I speak with our development officer there, and I have access to that knowledge to know. But it would also be good to know that where, as an artist, where to find other grants and apply to trusts. And I know some of them are quite niche as well. They're very like the one I recently got was you had to either be a female and an artist or a nurse, and that's what you got the funding for. And the application was really simple and great, and so it was to know what other opportunities were out there to get kind of just small nuggets of money, and not having to spend obviously like days writing kind of these. I know these applications are really worthwhile and are really beneficial, but sometimes it's just needing a little pocket of funding to for studio time, etc.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for sharing your project knowledge earlier as well, or just now. Now you're making me wish I had another slide. I've got another slide from another presentation where I've been talking to a room full of creative practitioners, so people who are working on that independent basis and not as an organisation. And I've got a kind of list of those sorts of places. So making sure you're kind of signed up to the kind of places where opportunities are advertised. I mean, I've talked very specifically here in terms of a couple of funders that you're applying for, and I've talked specifically around kind of national lottery opportunities across heritage and communities and kind of arts funders. But some of what I've covered is not just related to funding in terms of applying for funding like that, and I talked about it in terms of investment. It's also, there are so many other ways in which kind of artists can work and with other sort of setups. So I've seen a whole range of artists being funded through things like the business improvement districts in local places, and delivering specific things, and through developments, so especially around sort of public realm work as well, around building developments that have kind of taken place, or so there's ways in which all of that relates to how you're asking for the investment in your organisation. So don't just take it as kind of a funding checklist when you're applying to those funders, but kind of how you're talking about your work in general. A whole load of places. As someone who works in development and working across a myriad of kind of aspects of the cultural sector around that, one of my greatest sources of finding out is having a look at what's going on around me. There's always that kind of to understand who might invest or where some of that funding is coming. I mean, especially if I'm going to Esme Fairburn, I'm looking at Esme Fairburn all the time to see who they're funding, what other types of things are they kind of funding, to understand. Similarly, I'm looking at other organisations, other artists, other consortiums of organisations or consortia of organisations to see where that money is kind of coming from. So you're kind of understanding who's in that arena of investing in this type of work. Does
Thank
that
you.
help? And of course, Suzanne.
Hi. Yeah, just to say, yeah, to draw, I guess, that to a close, we're just about to run over. So yeah, absolutely join a mailing list. So yeah, CVAN East Midlands. If you join our mailing list, you'll get a monthly update of hopefully relevant opportunities for funding, jobs, various bits and bobs coming to you. AN as well have something kind of similar on their website, obviously arts jobs. But yeah, like Mandy said, if there's a project you're interested in, say such as the one Charlotte was speaking about or Tamsin, you scroll to the bottom of the project page, they'll have a list of partners, they'll have the logos, and you can kind of have a little bit of a look into what they're up to. So we're going to have a brief pause where we switch over between Mandy and Carl. So we're going to switch presentations. So yeah, just a minute or two, but just to